If trucks stop moving within, 5 days, no fresh produce at stores, medicines.
It's an industry that I think just doesn't get its fair share of kudos.
Multi-generation, family owned and operated, sizable carriers who have gone out of business recently.
What's it like to be in the trucking industry in California?
If you can navigate through the hurdles and you can get through all of that stuff and comply with the regulations, you get the prize. But it's challenging times right now, but it's also always challenging, in the state of California with all the regulatory stuff.
I don't see a lot of electric trucks out there. Give me the thoughts here. What's going on?
3 truck chargers could be the equivalent of 1,000 households' entire demand. Adding batteries into a semi increases the weight of that truck by like 6,000 to 8,000 pounds.
The bridges aren't going to take that. What freight bottleneck should we be fixing in California?
We're entering into another one of these cycles where transportation funding is going to be in the spotlight. Instead of us sharing a smaller piece of a dwindling pie, how do we expand the pie in a way that everybody prospers?
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. This is Between Two Shovels. I got my golden shovels, and this is a transportation podcast. So I'm leading the Connector JPA. That's, a regional roadway project, but we are trying to expand our conversation and talk a lot about the transportation industry broader. And you two are in the forefront of trucking. Right. And so Eric and Chris, thank you both so much for being here. How about we start off by just telling me a little about yourself and California Trucking Association?
Sure. Eric Sauer. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the California Trucking Association. I've been with the organization almost 25 years. So kind of started in the legislative arena area, policy and regulatory, and then was promoted to CEO back in 2022. And I thoroughly enjoy representing trucking companies and the owners of the trucking companies. You get a lot of family-based trucking companies, smaller fleets. We also have, the large national fleets as members as well. But, just hard work, 3rd, 4th generation trucking companies. It's an industry that I think just doesn't get its fair share of kudos. Mm-hmm. And when people see the trucks, I always say, oh, those big polluting, non-safety trucks, they're beating up the roads and all that stuff. And so, over the years, we've done we try and do our best to kind of educate the public and stuff about the benefits of the trucking company or the trucking industry and what they provide to not only Californians, but, Americans as well. And it's a fascinating industry. It's never a dull moment representing trucking companies in the state of California. The association's been around for over 90 years.
Oh, wow.
So we're, Chris, I think, coined the phrase, we're like the Chamber of Commerce for trucking companies in California. So again, never a dull moment, always have our hands full,
right?
But just really appreciate what the trucking industry provides to everybody.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah.
And so Chris Shimoda, I'm a principal and CEO of my own lobbying firm here in Sacramento, but came to that after a 17-year career working for Eric and with Eric at the California Trucking Association. And so did pretty much every job in the house, I like to say, other than janitor, and maybe sometimes janitor.
Yeah.
So policy, regulations, legislation, political action committees. So did quite a bit there, and am really lucky to continue representing trucking as now the principal lobbyist for CTA.
Absolutely. Now, do either of you own a giant truck? When we say trucks, we're talking, goods movement freight trucks. Either of you own or drive one?
Unfortunately, neither Eric or I have our commercial driver's license.
I don't think you've asked.
Yeah. It is its own special skill. We like to say, professional truck drivers, they're not out there driving a Honda Civic, right? This is a 80,000 pound piece of machinery that takes really specialized skills. Some of the most amazing stuff that you'll see, social media, the drivers like to show off and flex a little bit. If you can, back a 75-foot, Class 8 truck with a trailer attached, into the dock, that's not a skill that, comes easy. And so Eric and I are going to, stay out of the truck and leave that to the profession.
I have had the opportunity to drive a couple member trucks at their facilities, obviously not on the road. So, don't have the CDL to drive on the road, but yeah, you get in that truck And it's, you know, I got to tip my hat to these drivers. It's a tough job.
Sure.
And, you know, just to, you know, understand the, you know, navigating that truck and like Chris says, backing it in. And I got one funny story of when I did drive one of our members' trucks. We were in the yard and they had me like back it up. And I put my arm like, you know, you do in a car to put your arm back and look. And the guy next to me, he says, hey, hold on a sec. He's all, you Superman? And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, do you have x-ray vision? Can you see through that container? I said, no. He goes, we use mirrors. So you got to use mirrors to back up them all. I give up. Here, you do it. So no, it's one of those jobs that you just, I've always am amazed at, you know, these are just hard workers out there that are moving, you know, freight, and it's you know, it's a tough job.
Yeah. I've kind of, my analogy or metaphor in my head is like, it's almost like you're a pilot, right? It's a special type of license. You're moving a very special type of machinery, you know, and you got to be real skilled at it. And so I'm like, yeah, you're like the pilot of the truck. Right?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again for being here. And so I'm curious about the California landscape in terms of trucking. We've been hearing a lot over the years. You know, in terms of transportation, I'm always referring to trucking as like the users of our facilities. We go and we build them, but it's, you know, your members who are using the facility that we build. And, you know, we're hearing so much about the regulatory environment, whether it's clean trucks or electrification, things like that. Maybe you could just paint the landscape for us as to how the industry is operating and what's it like to be in the trucking industry in California.
Yeah, I'll open it up. You know, it's you know, these past few years have been a challenging time for the trucking industry. I mean, I've gone, you know, in my 24 years, there's ebbs and flows with the industry, you know, the soft freight market, but it's been challenging the last almost 4 years. This is the longest one that I've ever been a part of. But you've seen the resiliency of the trucking industry during that time, or during those times where, you know, for example, we've seen where, you know, members that were hauling during COVID, you know, obviously no events. And so one of our members, he was big on, you know, concert tours, sporting events. So he would haul all the production set up to those events and no events. So what do? You pivot to another market. And so, you know, they pivot to other segments that work. I know a food service company did the same thing. They kind of shifted to servicing grocery stores and whatnot, but it's very resilient and it's very challenging. You know, we're hoping to see some light at the end of the tunnel. As you mentioned, in California, it's, you know, the regulatory environment that offers like a lot of, you know, different challenges as opposed to other states. I always like to use the analogy. It's, you know, in California, they kind of use it as they dare you to be successful as a trucking company, or businesses for that matter. And, you know, if you can navigate through the hurdles and you can get through all of that stuff and comply with the regulations, you know, you get the prize. But it's, you know, challenging times right now, but it's also always challenging, you know, in the state of California with all the regulatory stuff.
Well, and, you know, I'm hearing that what you just said about the COVID, what a shock, right? I mean, the resiliency to stay in business, stay profitable, and continue to move the goods through the supply chain. I mean, that's a once in a lifetime or once in a forever shock to the industry, you know?
Yeah, and that's, you know, I think that what Eric's alluding to is that there's a lot of economic headwinds out there right now. I don't think it's a, you know, secret, right? The stock market may be up, but, you know, Main Street and industry will tell you, like, there's, you know, definitely some headwinds for businesses out there. And what happened during COVID was you had this big spending shift. You had folks who were, you know, spending money going out to restaurants and going to concerts, now suddenly stuck at home. I'm sure you did, like, you know, what I did and everyone else did, stay at home, get on Amazon or Wayfair, say like, hey, you know, that patio furniture is looking a little old, you know, maybe it's time to order something new. And all of that was, you know, kind of contributed to this pretty significant uptick in demand for freight services. And so, you know, what people referred to as, you know, it's like 5 years now ago, the supply chain crisis, right? That was like really hot. What that really was, I mean, it was like a 10 to 15% uptick in freight volumes that just threw the whole system out of whack because it happened just really suddenly.
Sure.
And so there was this wave of a lot of business, a lot of folks getting into the industry to sort of ride that out. That has since really gone away. It's, we've sort of settled into what I'd say like we had pre-2020, which was the last freight recession. We were in a freight recession at the time that COVID hit. And so we're back there, and we've been there for 3 years now. And so I know we've got a lot at the association, long-standing member companies who have gone out of business. I mean, these are multi-generation, family-owned and operated, sizable carriers who have gone out of business recently. And so the hope, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about, what is it that we'd like to see to sort of, maintain, freight reliability. I think what a lot of the companies are out there looking for right now is, okay, so we had this big shock with the pandemic, and then we're entering into this freight recession, and now, some interesting regulatory proposals out of California, tariffs, like you name it. There's just a lot of, uncertainty, and it's making it very difficult for these companies to plan and figure out how to survive when the freight market is down so significantly.
I mean, let's talk about that. So on our end, on our side of things, we're framing things in terms of travel time reliability, right? So we want to make it more reliable for the product to get to market, and from our side, that's capital investment in the highways, in the transportation system. But the users of it, you're seeing a whole different element. Talk about some of the things you'd like to, you guys are working on to improve that reliability.
Yeah, just to start out, so our national trade association, the American Trucking Association, has a research wing known as ATRI. They publish a freight bottleneck report every year, and inevitably California has several areas that rank in the top 20 bottlenecks in the entire country.
Wow.
Yeah. So, we always like to stress in the legislature and amongst, the folks having discussions on transportation funding, traditional infrastructure, highway infrastructure, it's not as popular as it once was, but it's still vital. It's still critical.
No argument here.
Yeah. What I like to point back to is, when I first started at CTA, I remember hearing, the National Highway Network. It's the National Highway and Defense Network for a reason, right? The Eisenhower administration basically identified, hey, logistics, moving goods around the country is vital for our national defense.
I've got a painting of Eisenhower in my office right next door here, my friend.
Absolutely. So, we always like to say we know that there are a lot of mouths to feed, so to speak, right? We've got transit needs, we've got active, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, but the highway system, it's not just, folks moving around in cars, right? It's literally the lifeblood, the circulatory system, so to speak, of the economy. And so
call them arteries.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, we do need to still figure out a way to continue to invest in traditional infrastructure, especially, maintenance, preservation, those sort of like safety projects that are critical. There's got to be a space for all of those type of projects to continue to get funded and executed.
Yeah.
And also the challenges that you see on the, capacity expansion. It's not like the old days where we just, add a lane here, add a lane there. And that's, talked about quite often when you're in these planning meetings, that those days it's not like it used to be. Like Chris,
I know that one.
Yeah. So it's, there's a lot of challenges out there. You're also looking at funding problems, and what we've been identifying obviously or what's been being looked at is to, the dwindling gas tax revenue, and looking at a substitute and looking at road user charge, which I'm actually on the road user charge technical advisory committee and have been since, I believe, 2014, 2015.
Okay. Whoa.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Am I treading into something that...
Tell me more about this.
Sure. I'll be brief. I'll try and be brief. So they created this advisory committee. I think it was DeSaulnier that actually created this. So I'm dating myself now, but they created this to examine how are we going to be able to pay for our roads with the dwindling gas tax. Mm-hmm. And, we're seeing advancements in, better fuel economy. For the trucking industry, you don't see huge leaps and, gains with and with trucks getting better fuel economy. They just, I think from our members, they say, oh yeah, we're getting less now than we were back in the day. But we understand, I think nationally, I think if you read the tea leaves that, hey, something has to be done. Like with this dwindling account, how are we going to pay for our roads? So they came up with a technical advisory committee called the Road User Charge Technical Advisory Committee to explore and examine if the vehicle per mile traveled is a VMT is an option to utilize or, look into. And so they've done some pilot programs, which we were part of a pilot program. We've been engaged since, they started the process. But, the public, they do not really receive it too well. It's, a lot of people, they just don't like the state or whomever, Big Brother chart, having, there's privacy.
Privacy.
A lot of issues that are, and so what this group has been doing is examining like if this is a viable option. And, unfortunately and I don't mind saying this because I've said it before at many of the meetings, is, if you stick with the original concept of looking at this as a viable option to continue to fund our roads and bridges, let's continue to do that. But if you start adding what I like to call Christmas tree ornaments to the Christmas tree, what happens? It falls over, right? So there's been some ornaments that have been added to the discussion over the last few years, which, have been kind of, that's kind of outside of the focus area of this. And it's going to be interesting to see how this, ends up. But this is something that not only California, but there's a coalition on the eastern part of the United States. It's also examining this. Oregon has, their program as well. So again, a lot of further discussion. You have to, trucking industry obviously is different than just you or I driving our car. You have companies that have fleets, they have other processes. And so we've been working with folks on if there was a kind of a program out there, these are the parameters that you have to look at and examine if the trucking industry is going to be part of it. But again, it's very, kind of in the initial phase of looking at it. And the public just does not really like this too much. I think it polled pretty poorly. So you have to address those concerns as well.
The question that's coming to my mind, I can understand there's passenger vehicle element, but when it comes to trucking, you guys are interstate. Right, like you're crossing state lines, or certainly county lines, So how would that play a role, or how are you, addressing that in this technical advisory?
There's some interstate or international fuel tax agreement, IFTA, international IRP, international registration plan. Those are kind of the platforms that have been looked at on if there is a way to implement this in the trucking industry. Is there some way that we could utilize these existing programs to implement and be able to have the trucking industry utilize that? We don't want to, if you overcomplicate things, like right now, it's really easy. You go to the pump, you pay, and you're paying for your road use right there. And it's funny, you do these, we did these focus groups through the Road User Charge Technical Advisory Committee. They went all throughout the state. They've been doing a great job on their due diligence. And they polled people. And the answers of when you ask the question, how do roads get paid for? The answers were pretty hilarious. And it's not, they just don't understand that you pay it at the pump. So if you don't make it as simple as that, and you make it hard and complicated, it's really hard to get the support behind it. But for us, you do bring up a good point. Interstate carriers, how are we going to account for the folks coming into the state and make sure that, there's kind of that level playing field?
Yeah.
So,
well, that's a tough problem to solve.
Yeah. So TBD on that.
Yeah. TBD.
Yeah.
Well, you're dancing around the issue of paying at the pump, but more and more we're seeing the electrification. Give me the oversight on that. I mean, give me the overview. I don't see a lot of electric freight trucks. In fact, I'll tell you this story. About a year ago, I was at the Port of Oakland and I was on a tour, and there was a lot of people on this tour, and the general manager was in a microphone. He was saying all this stuff to everyone, that the electrification, they were only using it at night because it was hard to, do the operations during the day, and they were only using a few electric trucks at night. The plug was like 25 pounds. I want to say it was like 8 inches in diameter to plug in this electric truck. And he said that we've been using diesel forever. There's a reason why we use diesel forever, and we're just doing this for regulatory compliance. Now that's what he said. And he said it in front of a lot of people. And so I'm curious, I don't see a lot of electric trucks out there, but you guys are, give me the thoughts here. What's going on?
And when people say commercial trucking, you got to remember it's everything from what we call in the industry a Class 2B. So that would be like your Amazon delivery van, right? A classic Sprinter van type truck, all the way up to a Class 8 semi, which is your classic big rig running down the road. And there are so many use types, construction, for instance, agriculture, final mile delivery, you name it. These are tools of work. And so it is not going to be as simple as electrifying light duty cars, which, you've really seen the success with Tesla. There was a model that appealed to, let's say like a more affluent vehicle buyer. They may have a, gasoline car in the garage, but also a second electric vehicle. Every single vehicle owned in the commercial trucking sector has to do a specific task to get the job done on behalf of the customer, be it, delivering packages to a doorstep or, hauling oversized, construction equipment to a site that may be mobile, right? And so where you're going to see early successes is really those smaller class vehicles that operate within a pretty tight range of a defined home base that they're returning to every night. So you can drop infrastructure to that home base and ideally charge at night where the electricity demand is going to be lower and the rates are going to be lower as well. So you are seeing some uptick in that space. You're actually seeing the prices of some of that equipment starting to come down. So I think that that's going to be the first place we really see widespread electrification. Now, your Class 8 semis are a different story. And I'll use as an example. So to overnight charge, right, you can overnight charge a car, plug into a level 2 charger at home and you can get a full charge. To overnight charge a Class 8 semi, you need the equivalent of a Tesla supercharger. You need DC fast charging, which the reason, for the audience that may not know why this is an issue, when you start getting into 50 kilowatts, 150 kilowatts, 350 kilowatts, for those that are not electrical engineers, let me break it down as simply as I can. So a megawatt is a 1,000 kilowatts. That's roughly the equivalent of 1,000 entire households worth of electricity demand. So some of our semi trucks are charging on 350 kilowatt chargers right now. So 3 truck chargers could be the equivalent of 1,000 households' entire demand.
Come on.
And so, when you start talking about that sort of electricity demand, the cost of the trucks, especially in the construction space, adding batteries into a semi increases the weight of that truck by like 6,000 to 8,000 pounds, and for,
the bridges aren't going to take that.
Yeah, bridges, there was that and you name it. It is a much more complicated situation. And so I think in the Class 8 semi space, what you're going to see is, certain limited applications where the technology fits within what needs to be done. In that space, you'll see some slow progress there, but we always like to say if the history of fuel switching, getting away from a dominant fuel to a new technology, these switches are not fast, they're not easy. A lot of issues arise, like even once you're past sort of that first like baby step. The example I always like to point to is that even though electric cars are relatively mature at this point, you still hear stories about, I'm showing up to chargers and 30% of them are down at any given time. I mean, those are just the growing pains that any new market goes through. And with something as critical as trucking, which, there are, studies and Eric and I can, put out there that talk about, if trucks stop moving within, 5 days, no fresh produce at stores, medicines.
We got serious problems
for healthcare. Run out. It is not something that we want to do a lot of, sort of science projects with, right? We need to be very sure that the technology is going to be able to service the demand that, the everyday Californians rely on, getting their goods and services in a reliable manner.
Everything you're saying is making total sense to me. As you're talking, I'm seeing dollar signs, right? And I want the cost of goods to go down, right? I want a more efficient purchasing power. And how are you guys handling this? I mean, what's your position? If we can ask you, what are your members asking you to do on this topic?
So without getting too far into the weeds, I'll say that we've sort of gone through this period with the primary regulator for us on this issue is the California Air Resources Board, arguably the most powerful regulatory body in the country when it comes to environmental regulation. And so we've gone through this period where they had promulgated a bunch of regulations mandating the use of zero emission trucks. Obviously there was an election this past November, the federal administration changed. And because of that, some of those efforts were pulled back and the agency is really taking this time to reassess, what the path moving forward is going to look like. And, what we'd say to them, and we have said to them, many times on and off the record is, there's a lot of companies that are putting forth a lot of investment. I'm talking, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars to try to make these technologies work. That's not going to stop. I mean, these companies are continuing those efforts as we speak. Where we need to find a meeting of the minds is, well, what is a realistic pace and scale of this implementation? Could we, as was proposed, feasibly get rid of internal combustion trucks by 2035, 2036? Those were the sort of timeframes that were proposed. Probably not. I think that, through having gone through those regulations and done the analysis and, sought the feedback of the industry, probably not going to happen that quickly. So how do we forge a path forward that really enables the companies who are trying to put forth the effort to deploy these technologies? How do we support their efforts rather than, what happened during this last round was, even the most forward-thinking companies were saying, we can't make this happen, right? And that is just a recipe for failure in regulations. And the industry is not a stranger to regulation. Been regulated by CARB and many other regulatory bodies for a long time. And I think that, again, going back to our, some of our original conversation, all that businesses are really looking for is certainty, consistency, and then I'll add in, some level of reasonableness with what they're being asked to do, right? It's got to be feasible, cost effective, and done in a way that, affordability is top of mind for, folks in this state. How do we deliver, a better product, lower costs, get a handle on inflation? I don't think that the general public is going to accept, we can do this, but at a cost that you're just simply not going to be able to bear.
Yeah. I can tell you guys have been involved in this deeply for a while. So
Absolutely.
Thank you. Let me pivot subjects a little bit. One of a good friend of mine, and as well as some of our audience, is freight brokers, right? And they're kind of like a middleman between manufacturers and truckers. Tell me a little bit about the California Trucking Association. What is it that you service your members on, and are there programs that maybe some of the smaller mom and pop companies out there could benefit from?
Yeah, so we, our main objective is to provide advocacy to the industry and our membership. And so the last, I want to say, probably 5-6 years, and I'll give tons of credit to this guy, we've had some really great successes over at the state capitol. And people always look at me like, what are you talking about? What are you, from Mars? This is California. You represent a business, a business like that doesn't sound possible. But no, because of Chris and our members' engagement, we've, obviously, we've had some really great successes. So that's obviously that's the reason why most people join an organization. Mm. We also provide, compliance assistance, regulatory assistance. And in California, we get a lot of calls and inquiries from our members on, hey, it's like trying to figure out some sort of Rubik's Cube or something on how to get through these like regulations. And so compliance assistance, we also provide products and services that, the tire programs and all sorts of other benefit programs that we offer. But it's our membership is, like I said before, it's multi-million-dollar international companies all the way down to the smaller companies that, that's what they need is a lot of assistance. And so, between all those products and services and programs that we provide and the regulatory and advocacy, that's pretty much, and obviously I do want to, make a note of other things. It's recognizing the drivers. And so we also, multiple times through the years, we'll have Driver of the Month banquets where we recognize the safest drivers, both in the
that's cool.
Southern California and Northern California. We also have the Truck Driver Championships, Southern and Northern California competitions. We had over 1,000 drivers compete in that in both the North and the South last year alone.
I mean, this is like a skills test?
Yeah. So they go around an obstacle course. They can't hit the cones and whatnot. But the cool thing is when you walk the perimeter, it's all these companies that rent big tents, bounce houses. It's a family event. And so kids are there rooting on their father or mother that's competing in it. And, there's a lot of food and stuff for the kids. And it's a great all day, over the weekend event that just, we also have the Truck Driver Appreciation Week that we do events throughout around the state to show appreciation to the drivers. And
keep me posted on that family event because I got 3 boys, man.
You want? Hey, we'll give you an invite. We'll throw you in a golf cart. We can drive you around and meet people. And it's good stuff. But it's just full service trade organization. I think we 93 years. So it's I think it's the largest state trucking association in the nation as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, to the message I give to your friend and building on what Eric said, so I've been doing trucking issues for 17 years now, and I think when we started, there was a sense in the industry. It's like, well, why don't folks pay more attention to us? Like we feel sort of like this hidden massive part of the the economy when it comes to the political arena. But, I will tell you, I think, partially through this sort of mainstreaming of the supply chain crisis, right? I was getting questions from my father-in-law, what's going on with all these ships, off the shore of the Port of Long Beach? We're definitely much more in the public eye than I think ever before, both trucking and just, the supply chain logistics generally, right? The average person is much more aware of the way that things, their goods and services actually get delivered to them. And so for folks in the industry, my message to them would be, you got to be politically active. You got to be engaged. If you're not a member of your trade association, join, number one. And also engage with the public policy process, right? I always like to challenge anybody who, comes and says, well, what the heck is going on? What are you guys doing? I'll always say, hey, have you made an effort to go out to your local assembly member or senators, like coffee session or a local town hall? Do you know their names?
Do you know their names?
Do you engage with them, right? Because the great thing about this industry is that, we've seen the data. We've got members in every 120, assembly and Senate districts. I mean, there is somebody in trucking in all of those areas in the state. And so we need to be out there telling the story of the industry, which is a great one. It is the largest provider of blue collar jobs left in the state. Consistently ranked as one of the best paying jobs that you can get without a high school diploma, majority minority workforce, and just, some of the greatest people I've met, just these, family owned and operated small businesses that still exist in the state. And so, just encourage your friend and others in the industry, get engaged. I know people are busy running their businesses, but, there's never been a more critical time, I think, for the industry to actually be out there and engaging with the public policy process.
Yeah. And if I could add a little bit more to that, over the last few years and another, kudo to Chris on this is kind of the expansion and the increasing amount of times we go out to elect key elected officials in the district, and we go to a member's facility and we invite them to come over and give them a tour. And it's to talk to them about rules and regulations that are being proposed and the impact. And, it's always good to put that face and that company, in front of the elected official. Now, I'm not saying every time it's, oh yeah, we're going to vote no on this, but it does give them pause for thought. And it does have them ask the question, like, is this going to impact my constituent in his business? I remember meeting with Joe Smith, and he was telling me all about this. So, like Chris says, is making these people aware, these regulators and elected officials, of, kind of this is how these things are going to work, how they're not going to work, and kind of give them a real world perspective on what the impact is on these things.
Sure. Okay. All right. So my last question for you both, because this is a transportation podcast, this is my industry. Freight bottlenecks. Wave the magic wand. What freight bottlenecks should we be fixing in California to improve reliability of the trucking network?
Go ahead, Chris.
So we will get you that ATRI list of bottlenecks. Which
can't fix all 8 of them.
Yeah, so
fix the Southern California areas.
Yeah. No, I do know, like, the 5560 intersection down in the Inland Empire. Actually, Metro is starting to do a lot of work there. That was one of the primary ones, but they're all over the state. All of your populated areas, freight demand is there no matter where you are. But I just say it at kind of a higher level. It's important that folks really engage in the discussion that we got to figure out a way with this dwindling pie of transportation money. How do we make space for all different type of projects, right? It can't. I remember seeing the need in funding shifts from things like the sustainable community strategies, the old Daryl Steinberg SB 375, sort of made the funding needs for transit, to try to get to reducing VMT in all these communities. I mean, I remember, I think Sandag was one of the first MPOs that published their numbers, and they said, this is our entire 30-year budget of, capital expenditure to get in compliance with this. And I think ever since that, we've really been struggling to find a way to not have, I think transit and highway cannibalize each other. And that's going to be really critical in these discussions over the next several years. We're entering into, since SB1 was, nearly 10 years ago, another one of these cycles where transportation funding is going to be in the spotlight. Mm-hmm. And I think that everybody in the industry would be well served by saying transit is important, highways are important, bridges are important, smart capacity expansion needs to be on the table. We need to get our handle on mitigation costs for all these projects. This is going to be, I think, a critical time for, really expanding the conversation. Instead of us sharing a smaller piece of a dwindling pie, how do we expand the pie in a way that everybody prospers?
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Eric, Chris. Wonderful to have you guys on here. Incredible insight, and I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for being on this show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.
All right.
Thank you.